Have you experienced a traumatic event in the past, whether in your childhood or adult life? If the answer is yes, you're surely not alone. Research shows that about 60% of men and 50% of women experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. And women are actually more likely to develop PTSD. As a clinical psychologist who has worked with thousands of traumatized individuals, I have found that trauma often reveals itself in unusual or confusing ways. And despite the belief that trauma goes away on its own or heals itself, unaddressed trauma tends to fester and worsen over time. Today, we'll dive into trauma and how to heal it with a wonderful, renowned trauma expert. And today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I was attacked a few years ago on my way home from work at night. My partner was really supportive at first, but now he tells me I should be over my fear of being alone or in dark spaces. I tell him I think I have PTSD, but he says I should just push forward because I wasn't raped. The person just pushed me down, kicked me, and took my backpack. He says it's all in my head and that I should just toughen up. Do you think I'm being weak? How can I get stronger? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need further support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a tremendous special guest, Dr. Lakita Carter. Dr. Carter is a clinical psychologist and international speaker. She will be sharing her expertise on trauma, relationships, and healing. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lakita. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It is so wonderful to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Now, before we launch into the topic of the day, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Okay. I think what makes me me is that I am fascinated by the human brain. And I always have been, even as a child. I've been fascinated by how people respond and why we choose the words that we choose and how we behave the way that we behave and what makes us feel connected to things in life, to people in life. And so that's sort of why I got into psychology, was because I wanted to know answers to questions that are pretty hard questions that I'm still looking for answers to.
I love that perspective. Join, we're in the same club, right?
Yeah.
The human mind, everything about us, every person, so unique.
Yes.
We're all alike in many ways, but so very different in very special ways as well. So thank you for that lovely start to today's episode. So now you're a trauma expert, and I really appreciate your platform, which is, all about healing and empowering and restoring.
Yes.
So with that as our foundation, which I really appreciate just slowing it down, healing, empowering, restoring, because when we look at the healing piece and then add that empowerment to it, where we find our internal strength, we live in our internal strength, we live in that place of courage, which is just amazing to me when And I don't it's not a one and done. I know for me, there are times where, you take a little dip in your sense of empowerment, and you gotta get it back and find out what happened to make it, start fizzling away. And then you're at peace about restoring. Trauma, definitely, life in many ways can empower us and help us grow, but can also really erode
So
that sense of who we are if we ever knew who we were, because sometimes we lose that early on in life because of external forces. But I really love that sense of restoring the self, which would maybe lead us into a bit of self care as well. So now I'm going to hand this over to you. You heard the listener's question of the day. What are some of your initial thoughts?
So, my first thought is that I'm sorry that this happened, right? Trauma is a major part of the world we live in, unfortunately. And you're right about the statistics that majority of people will experience at least one traumatic experience in their lifetime. And then when we look at specific traumas, we find that those numbers fluctuate, right? So, for example, 1 out of every 4 women will experience rape in their lives. So, and that's, 25%. So trauma really is something that is difficult to manage because we never know when it's coming. And for many other life disappointments and life circumstances, a lot of times we can predict when it's coming, right? We can predict if things are not going well at work. You can sometimes predict that you may be terminated. If things are not going well in your marriage, you can predict that there may be an end to this relationship at some point. So, and even with older aging parents and aging loved ones, we can predict that they might transition at a certain point. It might not be exactly what we think, but we know that there's a transitioning process underway. But many times with trauma, it comes out of nowhere, right? And that could be any type of trauma. That could be rape trauma or like a natural disaster trauma or a house fire. So to the person who wrote in, I'm sorry that you experienced this. I want to first validate what you experience is a trauma. To be attacked, whether you are kicked and punched or anything more than that, or even less than that, to be attacked and your personal space and body violated is in fact a trauma. And so that's one of the things that I want to make sure our listeners get is that the technical definition of trauma is a real or perceived threat to your life that includes some physical violence or sexual attack. Okay, so that is the technical definition of trauma, that you have an actual or threatened death, serious injury, or that you experience sexual violence. So in your case, the person who attacked you, you didn't know what they were thinking, right? You don't have access to a person's thoughts, and therefore you don't have access to their future behavior. You can't easily predict their behavior. You also couldn't easily predict their behavior because it was a stranger to you, right? So this is not something that you experienced multiple times with this person where you could say, okay, this person, when they typically hit me, they usually stop after I start crying, right? You had no idea when this attack was going to end. And that in and of itself makes it it makes sense for you to predict that you could have lost your life in that moment. That's where your mind was in that moment. How do I preserve my life? And so that is a trauma. You did experience it. And that means that there are going to be effects from that, in part because one of the things that this person did when they attacked you was that they violated a worldview that most Americans experience, not all, but most first world people, first world citizens, they walk around with the belief that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And they walk around with the belief that I am safe in my own body. Most people in first world countries think that way.
Hmm.
Not all. There are definitely marginalized groups that do not walk around thinking I am safe just being here. I want to be clear about that. But the vast majority of first world citizens walk around thinking I'm generally safe. So for your listeners, where you're sitting or standing right now, there is an assumed I'm safe right here. In other words, you won't just experience an attack out of nowhere. A bomb won't come out of nowhere. A car won't hit you on purpose, right? There's a general sense of safety. And this person, their behavior violated that worldview. And what the research shows is that when our worldviews are violated, it has a lasting effect on us. It is not the same thing as a friend who gets mad at you and curses at you. That's not a worldview violation. A worldview violation is a big value that we sort of hold more often than not as we walk through life, right? So the idea that you're safe where you stand and that no one's going to violate my personal space was violated. And therefore, there are effects for that violation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Dr. Lakita. And let's pause here for a minute because I really appreciate that you validated this woman's experience because, and I'm assuming it's a woman. It could be, any individual, but this individual's experience. And I also noted the verbiage that I was just, you know,
Mm.
pushed down, whatever, this backpack taken, when that really minimizes it. And I have a sense that someone or something is contributing to that belief that it's
Yeah.
it's only this. Whereas having somebody steal your backpack alone, that's a violation. That can really be terrifying. And another piece, and I appreciate your definition of trauma. And when we look at the definition of trauma in today's world, what causes a trauma, it tends to be tighter, than many people experience, a little bit more rigid, because from the definition, that very strict definition, a child who is, hit by their parents wouldn't necessarily have experienced a traumatic event. But in many cases, no matter the person's age, that still is a deeply traumatic event. Because when someone who says they love us is harming us in whatever way, that can be deeply traumatic. So I do want to notice that, and how we as clinicians tend to be have a broader definition, because that when we see people who are traumatized, we see
Right.
their childhood issues, being bullied, maybe not being threatened, every day at school thinking you're going to lose your life, but threatened as your sense of self and being safe on the schoolyard, safe in the hallways, wherever you are. And it goes back to that need for all of us to feel safe, as you said, safe
Yeah.
where you stand, that you're not going to be violated in some way. And then the
Yeah.
other interesting piece that I want to highlight, because as we were talking earlier about the statistics, 60% of men will experience one traumatic event, 50% of women. More women will develop PTSD. Why do some people develop PTSD and some not? And when we look at that, so much of it has to do with, as you were saying, a worldview, but also how you were raised, how much support you have around you, how you were feeling at the time of the incident. Was
Your
there
life
any
circumstances.
yeah, so there are so many variables, because sometimes I imagine it's the same for you, and I'm going to ask you this, but I've noticed with some of my clients, they'll say, "Well, I don't know why, I'm experiencing PTSD because my husband was on the same airplane and he's not traumatized by it," or "I had a similar background as a friend and she's thriving." And it's because we are unique individuals, and where we stand, emotionally, physically, mentally, when a trauma comes at us,
Yeah.
will depend. The outcome largely depends on factors of who the individual is in that moment. And that doesn't make the person broken, better than, worse than. It just means they're a person who experienced trauma.
Yeah. So, two important things that you touched on. One is the idea of trauma being broader than the medical definition. And I 100% agree, right? So, there is a medical definition in order to be diagnosed with PTSD. But then in the larger psych world, we see trauma often show up in many different ways that really are not necessarily as specific as real or perceived threat to the end of life, right? And you gave a great example around children who have been, who have been physically abused. They may not have the thought that my mom's going to kill me in this moment. They may not, but they still may experience trauma symptoms because of the frequency of the abuse or even the severity of the abuse, even if they don't necessarily perceive this to be an end of life experience. We also see this with people who experience their marriages experience infidelity, right? We see this betrayal trauma of a lot of trauma symptoms, and we can certainly talk about trauma symptoms, but a lot of trauma symptoms as a result of one partner not being committed to the other, right? So, yes, there is a technical medical definition of trauma, and it is very narrow. And as providers, as clinicians, we do need to consider that, right? Because we have to diagnose people according to what our science says. But then there's a broader relational, psychological definition of trauma. And I think a lot of things can fit into that definition because that broader definition really does speak to psychological safety psychological safety. And
Mhm.
that's very important. And so for this woman, I think what happened to her would meet the medical definition of trauma because she did not know if she was going to be killed in that moment. However, I think that a similar experience certainly could have created trauma symptoms in her where she would, like, for example, if her partner hit her, she would might not expect to die from that situation, but still have trauma symptoms. And then the second thing that you mentioned that I just want to highlight is how important it is to be safe where we stand, right? And that no one else gets to decide for us what is safe. And many times our male counterparts, they feel much safer in their skin and in their surroundings than than women do. And I say that having many conversations with patients, but also with friends, where I had a girlfriend who said, he comes in and he doesn't even leave, and he leaves the door unlocked. And I'm like, why isn't the door locked? And for him, she's married to a 6'8", 300-pound person. So so in his world, there aren't too many things that would enter their home that he can't address, right? There just aren't. And in her world, nearly everything that could enter their home would be a threat to her. So they just come from two different spaces, and that creates a different reaction in each of them around what it means to be safe in my own skin and know that I'm safe. And being safe and knowing that you're safe are two different things.
Thank you for that beautiful, slow down so we could notice that. And let's just dive into that a little bit deeper because it's a really good way to look at this from another vantage point is one person, if they're of smaller stature,
Sure.
they may feel more vulnerable if they have less physical training. Let's say they're not a police officer or a wrestler or an athlete. If somebody has experienced a previous bodily trauma or any type of trauma, their nervous system may be wired more differently. They may be more prone to anxiety. And another thing, wouldn't have thought of this until about a year ago. I had a coffee date with a girlfriend, and she was telling me, she said, I'm so happy I'm getting older. There's one part about being older I really like. She said, I'm not as attractive to men. And
Mm.
she said, I feel so much safer now. And I thought, interesting.
Very,
And she's older than I am, and I was thinking, "Wow." So
very.
she's not fond of many as she was talking about other aspects of aging she's not
Mhm.
so fond of. But in her life experience, being an attractive woman made her a target. So even though I will always think she's beautiful, for her, some shift that she perceives is happening has made her feel less like an individual part less vulnerable,
Vulnerable.
less like this
Yeah.
individual that somebody's going to come after. And so when we see that there are so many of these nuances to safety, and then to have someone, whether it's an outsider or a loved one, telling you, you should just get over this, or man up, or toughen up. No matter what your gender is, I'm not a big fan of the phrase man up
Yeah.
or or the phrase toughen up. What do you think?
So I think, and you mentioned this before, and I definitely want to make sure we point this out. Everything that happens in your life happens in a context because you're a layered person. And so one of the things that's really important for us to consider is that a trauma that happened to you when you're 25, you're not going to respond to the same way as a trauma that happened to you when you were 55. Your life is completely different. You have different layers. So a lot of times I will hear patients say, like, I'm not sure why I'm not snapping out of this. This is actually the third time I've been raped by a perfect stranger, or the second time I've been raped, and the first time I was able to, call the rape hotline, and I talked with friends, and I had some support, and I was able to bounce back. And now I don't even understand why I'm in therapy. Like, why do I even need this? I didn't need this before. And the truth is that your life is layered. So exactly what you said earlier, the job that you're currently doing has an impact on how you experience trauma. Where you are in your family, do you have young children or no children or older children? Where you are in your relationship, are you married, or are you dating, or are you single, are you divorced? What your spiritual life is like, that's a layer. Are you closer to your higher power now than you were then? Are you not? Um, all of these layers really help determine how you respond to a trauma. And we call that, my dissertation is actually on post-traumatic growth. We call that post-traumatic growth. So PTG. So the idea that your post-traumatic growth can certainly change depending on your current life circumstances. And one of the things that I have found is that when a trauma happens, but the person is living in a space where they just recently experienced grief, a loss, they have a very different response to that trauma than
Absolutely.
before, right? Because they have experienced a loss, and trauma is a form of loss, whether it's your loss of sense of self, or your sense of safety, or your identity, or even a loss of your home, like a loss of your space. If it's a house fire or a natural disaster, trauma in its foundation includes a large aspect of losing something that you considered yours. And so that creates this space of, now I've lost two things. I just lost my dog, and now I've lost this idea that I'm safe, or I've lost my psychological safety. I feel scared in the dark. And now that makes me feel very childlike, very needy, very clingy. Whatever it is, these are all very normal responses to somebody violating your sense of safety, to our reader. To our responder. It's very, very common for you to not want to be in the dark, not want to be alone, not want to be even alone in the daytime, not wanting to go places by yourself, not wanting to go out at all, not wanting to be seen. Some women and men report they can't look in the mirror. The mirror is reflecting a new you, a you that doesn't feel as safe, and therefore there's an image that shifts when you see yourself.
So beautifully said, Dr. Lakita. And I want to just slow it down for a minute to the piece you've said, that trauma is a loss. And I think many people don't realize that. We could have an entire episode on rape, because when you were talking about somebody who's been raped not once, horrific, twice, doubly horrific, a third time, I mean, incredibly horrific, each time horrific in its own way. And you think about the loss, plus our culture's sometimes tendency to blame the woman or the individual who was raped for whatever reason, when there's no excuse for raping someone. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark,
Yeah.
exclamation mark. Yet societal messages like that, well, she was asking for it. Oh, they were asking for it, whatever it is, make that loss all the harder to bear, because then all of the voices that are happening inside that individual, they're now exacerbated by the horrendous voices from outside that are blaming and judging. And so whatever the issue is that, causes a person, whether it's rape or something else, to have been traumatized, having external judgment is another horrific.
I see a re-traumatization.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. Some people don't agree. I completely agree that when you have somebody, because they're worsening the trauma instead of validating you and being there to support you, they are increasing and re-traumatizing that
Yes,
injury.
they are contributing to the lack of sense of safety. So when a survivor, and we definitely want to use the right context here, when a survivor, anybody who's lived past their trauma is a survivor, not a victim. When a survivor goes to make a report at a police station and they have to defend their behavior and their clothes and their actions and their words, then what you are saying is you weren't safe then and you aren't safe now. And you're coming someplace where you think I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
And that's the same case. It's not just making a police report. It's going to your family and saying, hey, this happened to me. And then them not believing you that, well, I wasn't safe then and it's not safe for me to tell you this now. So again, I have lost something. I'm still at a deficit in terms of the safety that I'm seeking. And I'm telling you this when someone is telling you their trauma story. I want you to hear, for all of our listeners, when a friend, family member, whoever is telling you their trauma story, what I want you to hear, no matter what they say, is, I'm seeking safety. Please make this safe for me. I need safety. I can't be unsafe for another second. That's what I want you to hear when someone's telling you their trauma story.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Lakita, for slowing it down, because when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for anyone who's not aware of it, it's this pyramid shaped structure of with this concept of what we need to be able to go out into the world and grow and thrive as human beings. At the very base of that pyramid, the very foundation is having a sense of safety. And if we don't have a sense of safety in ourselves, in our home lives, in our relationships, we really can't continue to move forward to become our fullest, highest, best selves, or, eventually get to self-actualization. And when there's a trauma, as you're very clearly walking us through, Dr. Lakita, it halts part of you. And because if you don't feel safe and aren't made, the people around you, they don't need to be experts. They don't need to be psychologists or domestic violence, therapists, nothing. They simply need to be able to say, I'm here for you. I see you.
I see
We
you.
create space for you.
I see
And
you.
even if you don't know anything else to do, whether, if you offer resources, you take the person to the emergency room if that's where they need to go, but don't bring judgment into the room. There's no
Yeah.
place for judgment, just that sense of seeing the person and creating, again, what we call a safe space, making it so they can talk, cry, be a little frozen if that's where they are. But no judgment, just pure, loving empathy.
Yes. Yes. And one way to know if you're being judgmental is if your question starts with why, it probably is a judgmental question. You're asking them to defend something.
Yes.
Why didn't
Why
you
were
go
you?
home? Yeah,
Yes.
why were you there? Why didn't you go home sooner? Why didn't you scream? If your question starts with why, it's probably, for my students, I call it the Lucy Desi effect, right? Like he's always saying, Lucy, explain yourself, right? So why questions demand an explanation, even if you say them softly. Why questions are the questions that parents ask when teenagers are break curfew. Why were you late? Why didn't you call? Why are you here right now? Why didn't you go where I said you should go? Right? These are all questions that feel very much so interrogating. So if it starts with a why, it probably is a question that could be construed as judgmental.
Again, another perfect point, because instead of saying, "Why did you dress that way?" or "Why didn't you carry your backpack in front of you?" Whatever it might be. "Why didn't you call for help?" Whatever it is, there are other ways to show love, support, and concern, such as a simple, "I'm here for you. How can I help?" And the person might not know. They may have no
Oh,
idea
yes,
what
100%.
they need in that moment. And so what do? You give them your presence, you give them your love, and you say, "I'm here. Would you like a hug? Would you like to talk?"
Yeah, one of the lost arts that I think our culture doesn't do a great job of. Many Eastern cultures do a much better job of. Our culture is we tend to lean towards doing. So we want to know, what can I do? When someone dies, we come over and we say, what can I do? Right? Do you need me to cook? Do you need me to send food? Do you need me to order, something? Do you need me to go with you to identify the body? Like, we want to do, and American culture is very much so committed to doing, and there is nothing wrong with that. But there are other cultures that are committed to being, and being is more prominent than doing. And I think that, anything in extreme is probably not ideal, right? Too much water can kill you, technically. So I think that in some ways, American culture would really benefit from leaning a little bit more into being. So when someone passes or when someone has a trauma experience, literally being with them and saying nothing is doing everything. Sometimes just your presence is reassuring. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but I have. Like, sometimes just getting to a place where this person is soothing to you. They don't have to cook anything. You can literally sit on the couch with the television on, and both of you are on opposite ends of the couch with your phones, and you're scrolling, right? But you're still in the same space. It can be very, very soothing. So just showing up and saying, "I'm here to sit with you today. We can order food if you want. Yeah. You can read. We could go for a walk. We can sit here. I'm just here to be. I don't have any agenda. Just want to, spend the day with you or spend the next few hours with you, the evening with you," can be really loving. It can be really loving.
Absolutely. Presence can just quiet presence. And sometimes somebody wants to be touched. They might want to hold your hand. They might want to hug. Other times they don't want any contact. They're either in a state of shock, or if they've been physically assaulted, often the idea of being touched is like, no.
Yeah.
So, not to take any of those things personally,
Correct.
just to notice.
Yes.
Because by creating that safe space, noticing. And you're right. Sometimes we don't have to do anything.
Yeah. I actually had a friend who lost her dad, and she lost him on a Saturday night. And I called her the next morning, and I said, she called me and told me that he was transitioning that Saturday night. And the next morning I called her and I said, "I'm not going to church today. I'm coming over." And I came over and I packed some ingredients because she loves my peach cobbler. So I packed some ingredients to make a peach cobbler at her house. I wasn't going to make it and then bring it. It was just going to be something that I did. So I packed all the ingredients I needed to make a peach cobbler, and I just sat there with her. And there were times when we laughed and joked, and there were times when she was tearful and we didn't say a word. And other people were scrolling in and out, and, I would offer them. I was essentially her hostess. I would offer them, "Hey, do you want something to drink?" The dog needed to be let out. And then at the end of the day, she goes, "I'm surprised I'm not sick of you. This was very nice." And she said, "Normally I get sick of people." And she said, "But there was something very soothing about your presence, and the fact that I wasn't required to entertain you or keep you company. You were just here." And so I think that's really important. And then also, what I want to share with our listeners is that there are times when people who have been traumatized, they don't want to have to make another decision. S-
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's easier for you to give them a multiple choice. "Hey, you haven't eaten since yesterday at noon and it's almost 3 o'clock. Chinese, Indian, or American? Which one?" Right? And then there are other times when, because of the type of trauma they experienced, their choice was taken away from them, you want to give them all the choice in the world, right? You don't want to give them a multiple choice. So you really have to feel them out and see if you sharing a multiple choice would be soothing to them, like, thank God I don't have to make another decision, or whether you giving them multiple choice would be almost taking away their sense of control. And once you figure that out, just asking a few questions like, how are you feeling? What would it be like if we did this? And if they say, like, I have no idea, I don't know anything, that's probably a sign they don't wanna make decisions. Just, say, "Hey, I know you love that Indian restaurant. I ordered Indian."
Again, really wonderfully put and highlighted because the nature of trauma is often, as we know, initially fight, flight, freeze, appease, that fawning place, and knowing where somebody is. And they're often in somebody quickly after a trauma, soon after a trauma, someone may be in such a frozen place, which is a lot of what you're describing, that if we come in and do one thing, let attune to them and just notice. It may be different from what you would want if you were in their situation, but if you attune and not have an agenda, have the only thing be gently tuning in, noticing. Do they seem cold? As you said, have they not eaten? Putting out and offering a couple things for them to choose from, and just notice. And do, as you said, a couple of choices. If they don't respond well to choices and seem like they're getting overwhelmed by choice, it might be something as simple as, hey, do you just want to step outside on the porch and hear the birds? Or, little tiny steps, and not telling somebody to get over it.
Yes.
Whatever the it is, it's one of the most, to me, dangerous parts of our society where we expect people to get over a trauma, a death, whatever it is. We all have our own timeline, and to help somebody move through it, not get over it, either be with it until they are ready to start moving through. And all of that takes attunement.
It does. It does. Attunement is one of my favorite words. You must
Mhm.
have been in my head. I've talked the example that I give, the visual example I give, which really works for, people who are a little bit older generation, so older millennials and Generation X and beyond. But if you remember car radios, before we had digital radios, there were analog radios. And so you had to turn the dial to the station, and when you hit a bump, the dial could shift a little bit. So your station would be snowy and you just had to tweak it ever so slightly to get a clear sound again, right? That's attunement. That's literally the tuner button, right? You're trying to get the sound as clear as possible. And that's what we want to do for people we love. We want to tweak ourselves ever so slightly so that we can create a clear connection for them in whatever ways they need to be connected.
I want to build on something you just said because it was so beautifully put. If you take that idea of the radio dial getting nudged slightly, and if you're the person who's experienced a trauma, that radio dial, it's not just
Yeah,
slight nudge, it is a big nudge. And what was a slight fuzziness in your world can now be a slight snowiness, can now be a blizzard
correct.
to where, and that is why so many, and now we're moving into the symptoms. And I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second. But some of the symptoms, that's why we have some of the trauma symptoms that we do, where we don't know. It feels like there's a blizzard around us. Life feels foggy. We don't know if it's okay to go outside. We don't know. And when you were talking earlier about maybe if a partner betrays you, you don't know. Should I sleep in the same bed as them? Should I leave? Should I file for divorce? Should I ever trust them again? Is it safe to love anybody again? All of this snowstorm, this blizzard of thoughts, of sensations, everything from hatred to anger to, negative self messages. So when trauma is in force, it is like a blizzard
It is.
of negativity, sadness, anger, sorrow, all sorts of feelings. And many people aren't accustomed to identifying those feelings. being able to sit with those feelings, even, it's such a confusing, having experienced traumas in my own life, I can absolutely say that when it happens to you, you just don't know how you're going to respond. That's the essence of trauma. So back to you, Dr. Lakita, to walk us through some of the symptoms, common symptoms, if you'd highlight them, because I realize we're already wrapping up, so if you can highlight some of those symptoms for us.
So when it comes to trauma, we have different groups of symptoms. One of them is intrusive symptoms. So intrusive symptoms are symptoms that sort of intrude or disrupt your thought processes. So it could be distressing memories. It could be flashbacks from the experience. It could be reminders or, like little dysregulators in your environment that create intrusive symptoms or even nightmares. So, nightmares about the experience or nightmares where the experience is worse, like the trauma experience was worse, or even it ended differently. There are also avoidance symptoms where you are literally avoiding all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the places, all the conversations, the objects, the smells, the people, the activities that centered on this trauma. So if you were traumatized walking out of the school building, right? Let's say the writer who sent in the letter, they were walking out of an evening class on a college campus when they were attacked. They might completely avoid the college camp, definitely the building, but the college campus. They might even avoid going to any class, even during the day, because the being on campus, seeing the building, parking in that parking lot, all create anxiety and panic inside of them. We also have symptoms that are associated with your mood. So, negative thought patterns and beliefs like shame and guilt, or informing some of our viewers, reminding others that shame is I am bad and guilt is I did bad. So, when we have shame around trauma, we have essentially taken on the perpetrator's response, right? Because the perpetrator was the bad actor here. But when we experience shame, when we've been traumatized, we are essentially identifying with the person who violated us. So we see lots of shame and guilt. Sometimes the mood also the negative mood symptoms create a disconnection or detachment in us, right? Where we just don't want to be around people. We don't even want to be around ourselves. Sometimes we have trouble connecting to the things that we used to do. We have trouble seeing ourselves. And another part of this is that not only do we have an influx of negative mood symptoms, but we have a decrease in positive mood symptoms. So even when positive things happen, our mood just can't get there because of this trauma experience. And then lastly, the last group of symptoms is just arousal or reactivity. So sometimes there's a startle response to anything, right? Somebody walks through the door and you're jumping, or there are angry outbursts or difficulty concentrating and focusing. Sometimes there is a hypervigilance, like every tiny crack in the house you're jumping because you are now on guard for future violations. And so for many people, these symptoms naturally dissipate as you start the healing process, as you talk to trusted others, as you work through your coping skills, right? Maybe you're coloring or you're drawing or you're exercising. But for some people, these symptoms don't abate with those home remedies, if you will. And so we need to engage treatment. And it's not just for some people. Sometimes it's for some people at this season in their life. So they might not have needed this kind of intervention before, but they do now. And what I want to just remind our viewers is that we do not want to shame ourselves for needing what we need right now, because we don't look at an infant and say, you need formula. Why don't you need cow's milk? That's what they need right then. And when they grow, when they're different, when they've developed, they'll need a different kind of milk. We don't shame, in other situations, we don't shame people for needing something at a different space than they need now, right? Some seasons in your marriage, you need to be loved on and coddled. There are other seasons in your marriage when you need to be independent and free to explore this new version of yourself now that your kids have gone to college. All of it's you, all of it's acceptable, all of it's important, all of it's valuable.
Thank you for highlighting that truth that whatever you need is what your body, mind, and spirit need in that moment. And even those listeners who have never experienced a trauma, you may think of yourself or even a kiddo. Some days you come home from work and you want an apple. Other times you're not hungry. Other times you want a chocolate chip cookie. Same with a kiddo. Sometimes they want a hug. Sometimes they want to run straight off to their room. It depends on
Yes.
the individual, the day, and in this case, how the trauma was experienced. So, looking at our listener's question and her saying, at the tail end of the question, like, should I get stronger? Am I
How
weak?
do I get stronger? Yeah.
How
Go to treatment. Go to treatment because this is what you need right now. And it just is what it is. And parents of teenagers, I have two teenage sons. I have 4 children, but I have two teenage sons. And what I can tell you is that some days I am mommy. They come in and they're like, Mommy, how was your day? And other days, hey, Mom. Like, their lips barely move, right? And you know what? Some days they just need, like, they get excited me every day. I'm so excited to see you. I missed you today. But there are some days when they don't need excited me. There's something on their minds and they need to go to their rooms and clear and think or be with themselves. And other days they need love and affection from me, right? And they're the same person. It's just that they need something different today. And as somebody who loves them, I'm willing to supply them with what they need today.
And that is a perfect example of what we talked about before, attunement.
Attunement,
And
yes.
that is the power to slow down and see what the other person is needing, is saying, is doing, attuning to them. And then I think it's just, again, I love the word from attachment theory, thinking of attunement and tuning in to the self and to other people. And that is something that the person who has experienced trauma has often lost, the ability to attune to themselves. So being their partner, not their judge, as they walk through that. And as I agree with you, and even for the listener who said, am I weak? Do I need to get stronger? No, you're not weak. Do you need to get stronger? Let's replace the word get stronger with, do you deserve to heal?
Yes.
Build
Or yes,
resilience.
100%. We all deserve to heal. But also, get stronger doesn't necessarily mean that there was weakness, right? Like the strongest person in the world that's competing at strongman or strongwoman competitions, they would argue they need to get stronger, right? Like, but they're strong. They're competing in it. So get stronger and am I weak are two different things for our viewers, right? Like
Two different things.
yes, just like you can be a good cook, you could be a better cook, right? It doesn't mean you're a bad cook originally. It could just mean you're getting better at this craft, right? So, yeah, get stronger, sure. But 100% of people could get stronger, I think.
Absolutely. And I think the reason I was steering clear of that word a bit was because the individual would use the word
Yeah,
earlier. He
yeah.
wants me to toughen up.
Toughen up,
And
yes.
if this individual is thinking tough is being strong, well, I am a big believer in healing what's hurting in order to evolve, to feel empowered, to feel safe. And
Yes,
to do that, it sounds like we're on the same page,
yes.
that instead of focusing on the getting tougher idea, how about getting the support? If
Getting
you
healing.
can't exactly,
You'll
if
get
you can't,
stronger through your healing. You'll get stronger
you're
through
here.
your empowerment. You'll get stronger through your restoration. Full circle, right? We'll get stronger. Yes.
Absolutely. And if this individual can't afford individual therapy, there is group therapy available, often community resources for somebody who's been a victim of a crime, who has survived that crime and is able to go. There are often really wonderful resources that you can find through your community center, hospital, sometimes a police department, different avenues. And that would be a really wonderful gift for this individual to be able to give themselves or have a friend or family member or a partner do some research, because sometimes doing that research, if you're the
You
one who
support.
has been traumatized, it seems like such a
Yeah.
vast undertaking.
Daunting. So that's another way that we support people. Like, hey, I went on Psychology today and found a list of therapists who are in your area and they take care first. Here you go. Use them as you want to. If you want me to, I'll reach out to them and see if they're accepting new patients. And I'll send you the list back and I'll asterisk the ones that are still accepting new patients. Also, for our listeners, sometimes your sheriff's office in your area can have different support programs. So some programs go through different city or county agencies. So ask in your sheriff's office. I know Baltimore Sheriff's Office has a whole domestic violence program that is not rooted in any other department in our area, but it is in the sheriff's office. And then lastly, consider that some states have pro bono counseling agencies that will help connect you to someone who will give you a certain number of therapy sessions for free. Maryland has a pro bono counseling agency. I actually sit on the board of that agency where they will connect somebody who is underinsured or uninsured with a volunteer provider who will agree to give them a certain number of sessions free of charge. And so that's another resource for you. But sometimes you have to do a little digging to figure that out. And so that's when if somebody says, what can I do? Can you help me find some place to get some treatment would be a great response.
Perfect. And California also has a program like that through the government. So wonderful to highlight those things. Listeners, this information, as much as we can get of it into the show notes, will be in the show notes. We can't cover every state, but you can find some little tidbits to get you on your way. Or if you're supporting somebody who's experienced trauma and is ready for some resources, or even if they're not ready, just have them handy so that when they are ready, they're there. Well, Dr. Lakita, thank you. What a wonderful, illuminating, and empowering conversation. Where can our listeners find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I post mental health tips through Instagram and Facebook multiple times a week. And you can find me on those social media channels at Dr. Lakita, DrLakeita. And you can also, if you reach out to me, direct message me for support in some way, I will certainly guide you in the right direction. I'm the only one that reads my direct messages, so you will get a response from me personally, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you. And listeners, you don't have to have a pen handy, but I'm going to read Dr. Lakita's name just so you have it. It's Lakeita D Carter, Carter. Again, all of that will be in the show notes. Dr. Lakita, thanks again for sharing
It's
your
absolutely
time
my
and
pleasure.
wisdom with us today, and listeners.
Thank you
Thank
for having
you.
me.
Oh, it's such an honor. Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for sharing your time, your energy with us today. Deeply grateful. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.